My name is Caitlin Grabowski. My project is called The Hunter and the Hunted, the mathematical relationship between a predator species population and that of its prey. I did this project for my ordinary differential equations class. The professor of my class and my advisor for the project was Dr. Lin, the Associate Professor of Mathematics at Greater Allegheny. Firstly, an ordinary differential equation, or ODE, is an equation involving an unknown function and some form of its derivative with respect to one dependent variable, in this case, time. The purpose of my research was to use the Lotka-Volterra predator-prey ODE and apply it to real data to analyze how effective the model is. Specifically, I used it to model the wolf and elk populations of Yellowstone National Park. Through Penn State online resources, I was able to find many articles that gave me a basic understanding of mathematical ecology, and I came to learn that research in the Lotka-Volterra ODE is still very much active, as scientists are striving to make a model that more accurately depicts the real-world complexities. There are many variables that can be considered when calculating the rate of population change, such as herd density, prey refuge, and increased satiation of a predator after a kill, and this is known as a Halling functional response. In the equation, C1 is the term that represents the natural growth rate of the prey population that is assumed to grow exponentially given zero predators. Similarly, C3 is in the term of the predator equation that represents the exponential growth rate, which is negative. C4 is part of the term that represents the efficiency at which predators can convert the energy they obtain by consuming prey into reproducing more predators. But notice that while the term of C3 is similar to that of C4 because they both include what is called the interaction term, XY, they are not equal, since the rate at which the prey population declines isn't necessarily equal to the increase of the predator population. I created my own Lotka-Volterra model for the wolf and elk population of Yellowstone National Park, using data obtained from the National Park Service. I first calculated the average values of each of the four constants. You can see the results in the bottom right of my poster. What I calculated doesn't make sense with reality, doesn't align with reality. For example, the negative value of C1 would make the growth term for the prey population negative, when it should be positive. So it can be concluded that the Lotka-Volterra model isn't an accurate model of the population dynamics of wolf and elk in northern Yellowstone. The model has only been found to be relatively accurate given very specific conditions, among them the complete reliance of the predator on the prey species as a food source, limitless food for the prey, and a closed environment. In my study, the populations I chose, there was a significant movement of individuals from the area, and the wolves didn't rely entirely on elk as a food source. This affected the parameter values and the accuracy of the model that requires these conditions to be met for the model to be somewhat accurate. After finding the constant values, I solved the system equation by setting dx dt and dy dt to 0, as an equilibrium solution is one such that there is no rate of change. The zero equilibrium solution represents the extinction of both species, and this implies how the predator relies on the prey completely for sustenance. And the non-zero solution represents a state in which both populations can coexist. The importance of the Lotka-Volterra model is in managing wildlife populations. While the model is not accurate in representing observed data, the model is useful in illustrating what one should expect given certain conditions, and so one can compare the model to real-life scenarios and determine if there is a disturbance in the environment having an adverse effect on a population. As seen in this graph in the middle of my poster, it is expected that the population of predators will closely follow that of the prey species, showing a cyclical rise and fall of both populations over time. What intrigues researchers about this model that was developed nearly a century ago is that they can incorporate additional factors that affect population growth in order to emphasize that factor's influence on a population, and they can use their results for real-life scenarios and applied in natural resource management and wildlife conservation. Current and future research is being devoted to how the model applies not only to ecology but to pandemics, which has become a subject of interest due to COVID-19. The Lotka-Volterra model can predict the number of individuals who are infected or carriers of the virus. So as you can see, the Lotka-Volterra ODE is a very applicable equation, as its basic forms can be adjusted to represent how two populations interact and affect each other. I was able to access an entire database of knowledge that I otherwise wouldn't have had access to had I not been a student at Penn State, such as Google Scholar and PSU libraries. I began my research by typing in the search engine the Lotka-Volterra ordinary differential equation predator-prey model, and I got many results. One article that I read came from the Journal of Wildlife Management, an issue from 2004, and another from the Journal of Ecological Modeling that dealt with research that expanded on the basic Lotka-Volterra model. But in order to identify papers that would be the most pertinent to my more simple evaluation of the model and its application to predator-prey populations, I chose to search for articles that dealt with moose and wolf populations of Banff National Park, Canada. This was a case study that I had found about earlier in my research, and it was the most closely related to my project. So by inputting instead Lotka-Volterra and Banff National Park, I greatly narrowed the scope of articles. I also found papers from universities, like a thesis document from the University of Montana by a student applying to their master's. Other sources used came from online scientific publishers like Science Direct, Elsevier, and Plus One. But most of the sources I used to develop a basic understanding of what the Lotka-Volterra was and how to use it were found through Google Scholar or college websites. I don't believe my research would have been as successful if I hadn't had access to the resources I did as a student at Penn State. I may have found some of the resources that I used, or some of the sources that I used, but it surely would have taken me much longer and me knowing exactly what the article was in order to find it. People who don't have access to such a database most likely have to find their research at their school or local community libraries, or what free publishers there are online in Google, but this probably yields less scholarly papers. I learned a lot from my first research experience, and with my first research project completed, I believe I may pursue more experience in undergraduate research. I want to be able to, in the future, conduct my own research pertaining to conservation of the environment. As an engineering major with a passion for biology, I see myself as a very unique individual in the engineering field, someone who is hopefully developing solid research skills in a very interdisciplinary perspective.